Hey, Reddit. I don't even know where to start. My head's a mess and I feel like I'm spiraling, but maybe putting this all down will help me make sense of it. I'm honestly not sure if I need advice, validation, or just a place to let it all out. My name's Dave, and I've been married to Sarah for almost 10 years. We met in our 20s, back when I was fresh out of college and still figuring out what I wanted from life. She was this spark, this radiant energy, and she had this way of making everyone around her feel important. I was a bit of an introvert, always the type to hang in the background, but with her, I felt seen. I thought we were a perfect match, her spontaneity to balance out my steadiness. I thought we had something real, something that could weather anything. Lately, though, I don't know. Things have felt off, like there's this invisible wall between us that wasn't there before. I've tried telling myself it's just normal relationship stuff, that things naturally change over time, but this doesn't feel like just a phase. It feels like something deeper, something I can't touch or understand. It started with little things, things I almost didn't notice. Sarah started spending a lot more time on her phone, always texting or scrolling, smiling at something I couldn't see. She's always been social, so I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed she was bringing her phone with her everywhere, even into the bathroom. She'd hold it close, like it was some kind of secret, and whenever I'd ask her who she was talking to, she'd just brush me off, calling me paranoid or overly sensitive. She'd laugh, but the laugh felt forced. Then came the late nights. Sarah works in marketing, so late meetings and networking events aren't out of the ordinary, but suddenly, she was going out 2 or 3 times a week. Every time, it was some kind of business dinner or networking opportunity. At first, I didn't question it. I trusted her. But after a while, the frequency, and the way she always seemed evasive about where she was going, started eating at me. I'd ask who she was meeting, and she'd say something vague like, "Oh, just some people from work," and change the subject. One evening, I was texting with Sylvia, an old mutual friend who's known both of us since college. She casually mentioned that she'd seen Sarah out at a restaurant a few days prior. She looked happy, Sylvia had said, almost offhandedly, like she was having the time of her life. She assumed Sarah had been out with me, and I didn't correct her. I didn't know how to say, "I don't actually know who she was with." That night was one of the work dinners she'd told me about, the one where she said she'd be meeting clients. I remember just standing there in the kitchen after reading Sylvia's text, feeling this cold wave of something. Fear, anger, confusion, all mixed together. But I couldn't bring myself to confront Sarah. Not yet. I kept telling myself that maybe I was being paranoid, that maybe it was all just a big misunderstanding. But then, last Thursday, things took a turn. Sarah had another business dinner. She was dressed up more than usual, wearing this black dress that I hadn't seen her wear in years, the one she used to put on for date nights with me. She caught me staring and gave me this weird smile. "What?" she asked, almost defensively. I just shook my head and told her she looked nice, but inside, I felt like I was watching her slip away right in front of me. As she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I tried to watch TV, to distract myself, but I couldn't focus on anything. After a while, I grabbed my keys and headed to a bar near where she said her meeting was supposed to be. I didn't have a plan, didn't know what I'd do if I saw her. I just needed something, some kind of confirmation that it was all in my head, or, if it wasn't, that I wasn't losing my mind. When I got to the area, I ended up parking near a restaurant we used to go to for special occasions. I was just sitting there, staring at the entrance when I saw her. She was sitting at a table by the window, and across from her was a man I didn't recognize. He was leaning in, laughing at something she'd said, and she was laughing too. This light, carefree laugh I hadn't heard in years. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I wanted to storm in there, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, just watching her, feeling this mix of anger, heartbreak, and helplessness. They looked close, too close. At one point, she put her hand on his arm, this familiar gesture that used to be reserved for me. I don't know how long I sat there, just watching. Eventually, I realized I had a crumpled piece of paper in my jacket pocket. The letter I'd written for our anniversary a few weeks ago. A letter I'd never gotten around to giving her. It was meant to be a surprise, a reminder of our years together and everything we'd built. Without thinking, I got out of my car, walked into the restaurant, and handed the letter to a waiter. I asked him to deliver it to her table, not even caring what she'd think or how she'd react. I just wanted her to feel, even for a second, the weight of what she was throwing away. Then I turned around, walked out of the restaurant, and drove away. I didn't stick around to see her reaction, but I can only imagine her shock when she opened that letter. I wish I could say I felt powerful, like I'd taken control, but the truth is, as I drove away, I felt like I was falling apart. I don't know what to do next, Reddit. I still haven't confronted her directly, and part of me wonders if I should even try. I keep hoping there's some logical explanation, but deep down, I think I already know the truth. I just don't know if I'm ready to face it yet. The next morning, I woke up with this gnawing feeling in my chest, like the world had shifted but I hadn't caught up yet. I didn't sleep much after last night. Images of Sarah laughing with that man kept flashing through my mind every time I closed my eyes. It felt surreal, like maybe I dreamed the whole thing. But the memory of it was too vivid, too raw to be anything but real. I couldn't bring myself to go back home right away, so I drove around for hours. The sun was already rising by the time I pulled into our driveway. The house looked the same as always, quiet, peaceful, our little sanctuary. Except now it felt different, like it was hiding secrets I wasn't supposed to know. When I walked in, Sarah was already in the kitchen, making coffee like it was just another morning. She didn't even look up when I entered. "You're up early," she said casually, pouring coffee into a mug. I stood there, watching her move around the kitchen, acting as if nothing had happened. She was dressed in her pajamas, hair slightly messy, her face free of makeup, the same woman I'd seen countless mornings over the past decade. But now, that image of her laughing with that stranger in the restaurant was etched into my mind, tainting everything. I cleared my throat, feeling the words bubble up before I could stop them. "How was your business dinner last night?" For a split second, she froze, just a slight hesitation, before she turned to face me. Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes, something guarded. "Oh, it was fine," she said, her voice steady, casual, long and boring, as usual. The ease with which she lied made my stomach twist. I wondered how many times she'd done this before. Lied to my face with that same calm expression. And who was there? Anyone I know? She shrugged, turning back to her coffee. "Just the usual people. You know, clients and a couple of my colleagues." The audacity of it all hit me like a slap. She was lying straight to my face, covering up the truth with no remorse. I tried to hold back, but I couldn't. "So, what about the guy you were with at that restaurant? The one you were laughing with?" I forced the words out, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing just slightly before she caught herself. Her face hardened, and for a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, she let out a bitter laugh. "Were you following me, Dave? Do you seriously have that little trust in me?" The way she flipped the blame made my blood boil. Trust? After what I'd seen, she had the nerve to bring up trust. "I happened to be at that restaurant, Sarah, and I saw you with him. So go ahead, tell me the truth. Who is he?" She sighed, rolling her eyes as if I were being ridiculous. "It was a business dinner, Dave. I was talking with a client. Do you really think I'd do something as stupid as cheat on you, in public, where anyone could see? God, you sound paranoid." Her words were like a slap, each one sharpened with contempt. The way she spoke to me, as if I was beneath her, as if I were nothing but a nuisance, cut deeper than I expected. I'd always been there for her, loyal, supportive, bending over backwards to make her happy. And this was how she repaid me? I tried to stay calm, but the anger and hurt kept bubbling up. "Sarah, I'm not stupid. I saw the way you were looking at him, laughing with him. You don't look at me like that anymore." She crossed her arms, her face a mix of annoyance and defiance. "Maybe that's because you've been so suffocating lately. always asking where I am, what I'm doing. Maybe if you trusted me, I wouldn't feel like I had to keep things from you. There it was, the deflection, the blame. Somehow, in her mind, this was all my fault. I could feel my hands clenching into fists, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. I trusted you for 10 years, Sarah. I've always trusted you. And now, you're standing here, looking me in the eye, and lying straight to my face. Do you even care about us anymore? She rolled her eyes again. That same dismissive gesture that had once been endearing but now felt like a slap. Oh, please, Dave. Stop with the theatrics. You're acting like a clingy teenager. I'm allowed to have my own life, my own friends, without you breathing down my neck. Her words sank in, each one dripping with contempt. She wasn't apologetic, wasn't even defensive. She was annoyed, like I was some nuisance she had to tolerate. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd loved and built a life with, was gone. In her place was someone cold, someone who didn't even care enough to pretend. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. So, that's it? You're just going to keep lying, keep pretending that there's nothing going on? She shrugged, looking completely unfazed. Believe what you want, Dave. If you want to play the role of the wounded husband, fine. But I don't have time for this drama. That was it. The last straw. I felt something inside me break, a part of me that had clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd still care enough to be honest. But there was nothing left. No honesty, no remorse, just this empty, indifferent woman who couldn't be bothered to tell me the truth. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there, couldn't stand in that kitchen with the smell of coffee and her lies suffocating me. I spent the day wandering aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. I ended up calling Sylvia, the only person I trusted enough to confide in. I told her everything. How Sarah had been lying, the man I'd seen her with, her cold, dismissive response. Sylvia listened quietly, letting me pour it all out. When I finished, there was a pause, then she sighed. Dave, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize things were this bad. But you deserve better than this. You deserve someone who actually cares. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know if I believed them yet, but hearing someone else say it gave me a small spark of strength. Maybe I did deserve better. Maybe I deserved more than this endless cycle of lies and blame. As I drove back home that evening, I felt something shifting inside me. I wasn't ready to confront Sarah again, wasn't sure if I could even face her without breaking down. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a marriage with someone who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. Something had to change. And for the first time, I felt ready to make that change, no matter how hard it might be. I didn't talk to Sarah that night. I couldn't bear to. She stayed in the bedroom with the door closed, and I ended up sleeping on the couch, staring at the ceiling until the early hours. I kept replaying our conversation, her cold expression, her absolute indifference. It was as if she didn't care that she was caught. She cared only that I dared to question her. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, packed her bag, and left for work without so much as a glance in my direction. It was almost impressive, the ease with which she could lie, as if years of our shared life together were nothing more than a play she was tired of performing in. As soon as the door closed behind her, I felt this surge of desperation, like I needed answers right then and there, or I'd go mad. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think. I couldn't ignore my gut anymore. I needed proof, something solid to confirm what I already knew in my heart. I started with her phone. I knew her passcode. She'd given it to me ages ago, back when there were no secrets. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, but when I opened her messages, everything looked clean, too clean. All her recent messages had been deleted, like she'd swept out any trace of conversation. There were a few chats with her sister, a work group chat, and some old friends, but nothing suspicious. Frustrated, I moved on to her social media accounts. Again, nothing. No hidden messages, no flirty comments, nothing that could link her to that man from the restaurant. She'd covered her tracks well, but I wasn't giving up. I needed to know. Then, I remembered her work emails. Sarah had a habit of leaving her laptop at home sometimes, and she'd left it on her desk in the corner of our bedroom. I'd never checked her emails before, never even thought about it, honestly. But desperate times, right? I told myself I'd just take a quick look, see if anything stood out, and then I'd put it all back. After opening her laptop, I clicked into her email account, scanning through the inbox. At first, it was just boring work stuff. Marketing reports, scheduling reminders, a bunch of newsletters she'd never unsubscribed from. But then I found an email chain labeled Dinner Follow-Up with a contact I didn't recognize, Derek R. My heart raced as I opened it. The emails were short, almost annoyingly professional, but between the lines, there was something that felt off. "Thanks for last night," he'd written in one message, followed by, "Looking forward to our next meeting." She'd responded with a simple, "It was a pleasure, as always." No specifics, nothing that would set off alarms for anyone else. But to me, it felt intimate. The tone was so familiar, like this wasn't just business. This was personal. I went further back in the email chain, but it was no use. Their messages were always vague, always carefully worded, as if they were dancing around something they both knew they didn't need to spell out. I closed the laptop, my head pounding. There it was, proof, or at least as close to proof as I'd found so far. But I still wanted more. I called Sylvia, hoping she'd have some insight. When I told her about the email, she paused. "I don't know this Derek guy," she said slowly, "but I have seen Sarah out a couple of times with some guy I didn't recognize." I didn't think much of it at the time, thought maybe it was just a colleague, but now I'm not so sure. I asked if she'd seen anything that felt off, and she hesitated before saying, "Well, now that you mention it, yeah." She seemed a little close to him, like, not in a normal work friend way. That was it. I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. I thanked Sylvia, hung up, and sat in silence, my mind racing. That night, I decided to confront her. She came home late, as usual, and barely glanced my way as she walked in. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged. "Busy, that's all. I'm exhausted." I felt that familiar frustration rising, but I held it down. With work or with Derek? She froze. It was subtle, just a slight stiffening in her shoulders, but I noticed it. She turned slowly, her face a mask of confusion. "Who's Derek?" "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I saw the emails. I know you've been meeting him. Just tell me the truth." Her expression shifted, a flicker of something. Anger, maybe? She looked at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Dave, this is ridiculous. You're reading too much into things. He's just a colleague." "A colleague you meet late at night for business dinners?" My voice was rising, and I didn't care. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" She scoffed, crossing her arms. "God, Dave, do you even hear yourself? You sound insane. Derek and I are colleagues. We work together. It's called networking. Maybe if you actually cared about my career, you'd understand." Her words stung, not just because they were cruel, but because they were so calculated. She was flipping it around, making it about my lack of support for her. I realized, then, that I was dealing with someone I barely recognized. A woman who would twist the knife rather than admit even a sliver of guilt. "You're lying to me," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I know you are. Just tell me the truth, Sarah. If there's something going on, if you're seeing someone else, just admit it." Her face hardened. "You know what, Dave? Believe whatever you want. If you're so desperate to play the victim, go ahead. I'm done explaining myself to you." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, hollowed out and defeated. I felt this wave of helplessness wash over me, followed by a deep, aching loneliness. This wasn't just about the lies anymore. It was about the realization that the person I'd loved, trusted, and built my life around was willing to tear me down to protect herself. I'd spent years giving her everything, and now she was treating me like I was disposable, like I was nothing more than an obstacle. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, but I still didn't know what to do. Divorce felt final, terrifying. A part of me still clung to the hope that this was some nightmare I could wake up from, that the woman I'd loved was still in there, somewhere. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe that woman had never existed. The next few days were unbearable. Sarah continued to act like everything was normal, going about her routine, barely acknowledging my existence. She'd come home late, drop her purse by the door, and give me a cold, dismissive glance before disappearing into the bedroom. If I asked her anything, where she'd been, who she'd been with, she'd sigh and accuse me of snooping or being insecure. It was like she'd become a stranger overnight, someone who saw me as an inconvenience rather than her husband. The weight of her indifference was crushing, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. I told myself that if I just found undeniable proof, she wouldn't be able to keep up the lies. So, one evening, while she was in the shower, I decided to dig a little deeper. I wasn't proud of it, but I'd reached a point where I couldn't trust her words anymore. I needed the truth, even if it meant stooping lower than I ever thought I would. I went through her purse and found nothing unusual, just the usual clutter. Makeup, receipts, gum wrappers. But then I found her second phone. It was tucked in the bottom pocket, hidden from plain sight. My heart stopped. We had never talked about getting a second phone. I knew nothing about this one. Why would she have a secret phone? My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. She used the same passcode as her main phone. She must have thought I'd never find it. When I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. There were texts, dozens of them, from Derek. Derek, I can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect. Let's make it a weekend getaway next time. Sarah, you're on. Just need to come up with another work trip excuse for Dave. Derek, poor guy. He has no idea. Every word felt like a punch. I could barely breathe. I'd known, deep down, that she was lying to me, but seeing it there in black and white, her actual words, was something else. There were photos, too. Selfies of her and Derek at what looked like a beach, both of them smiling, laughing, her head resting on his shoulder. I dropped the phone, feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. All the love I'd poured into this marriage, all the nights I'd stayed up worrying, wondering if I was going crazy, it all came crashing down in a single moment of brutal clarity. She was living a double life, laughing at me behind my back, using me as her convenient cover while she played house with someone else. When she came out of the shower, she saw me sitting there, her second phone on the table in front of me. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw real fear. But then, like flipping a switch, her face hardened. She crossed her arms and looked at me, defiant. So, you went through my things? She asked, her voice cold, as if I was the one who'd crossed the line. I couldn't even form words. The anger and hurt inside me were so overwhelming I felt like I might explode. How could you do this to me? Was all I could manage. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Dave. Don't act like this is some huge betrayal. People grow apart. Maybe if you weren't so clingy, so predictable, I wouldn't have felt the need to look elsewhere. Her words cut deeper than anything I could have imagined. She wasn't just dismissing me. She was trying to make it my fault. Like I'd somehow driven her to this by being, what? Loyal? Supportive? Predictable? I could feel tears burning at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Predictable? I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. You're saying this is my fault? She shrugged, barely looking at me. Maybe if you'd been a little more exciting, I wouldn't have had to find excitement elsewhere. Derek understands me in ways you never could. He's ambitious, spontaneous, everything you're not. I felt like I was being torn in two. This woman, the one I'd loved and trusted for nearly a decade, was standing in front of me, telling me that I was the problem, that her affair was somehow justified because I wasn't enough for her. The cruelty in her words was stunning, and it took everything I had not to completely break down. Then why didn't you just leave? I asked, my voice hollow. If I wasn't enough for you, if you were so miserable, why didn't you just leave? She looked at me, her face expressionless. Because, Dave, you're comfortable. You're reliable. And honestly, I didn't think you'd ever find out. Those words hit me harder than anything else. I wasn't her partner. I was her safety net, someone she could use and discard when it was convenient. I could feel something inside me harden, like a final wall coming up, protecting me from the raw, searing pain of her betrayal. Fine, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. If that's how you feel, then let's make this easy. I'll file for divorce. You can go live your exciting life with Derek. She smirked, like she'd won some kind of game. Good. Maybe now we can both move on and find what we actually want. That smirk, that casual dismissal, was the last straw. I felt a surge of anger I'd never felt before, a need to do something, anything to make her feel a fraction of the pain she'd put me through. I thought back to all those late nights, those moments of doubt and self-blame, all while she'd been out laughing with him. Without another word, I stood up, grabbed her second phone, and walked out of the house. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I drove to the restaurant where they'd had their last business dinner. It was a small, upscale place, the kind of spot she'd picked for special occasions. I walked inside, still clutching her phone, feeling a strange mix of nerves and resolve. The hostess greeted me with a polite smile. Table for one? No, I replied. Actually, I need a favor. Do you have a waiter named James? She hesitated, but nodded. Yes, he's working tonight. May I ask what this is about? Could you tell him to come over for a moment? I need his help with something. A few minutes later, a young guy in a waiter's uniform approached, looking slightly confused. I explained that I needed him to deliver something for me. I handed him Sarah's second phone, Derek's messages still open, along with the wedding ring I'd taken off on my way here. I want you to give these to my wife the next time she comes in here, I said. Just place them on the table, with my compliments. James' eyes widened as he processed what I was asking. Are you sure, man? I mean, that sounds intense. I nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. And when she asks who sent them, just say, your husband. James hesitated but nodded, a flicker of understanding in his expression. All right, I'll do it. I thanked him, turned, and walked out of the restaurant. There was a strange sense of finality in the air, a quiet resolve that settled over me as I got into my car and drove away. That night, I went back to the house, gathered my things, and left. I knew that if I stayed, if I tried to talk to her again, I'd only end up hurt. There was no point in waiting for apologies or explanations. Sarah had made her choices, and I had to make mine. Leaving the house felt like walking away from a life I no longer recognized. The memories, the laughter, the shared dreams, they felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone who didn't know the person Sarah had become. I spent the first few nights at a friend's place, trying to piece together what my life would look like now. Sarah called a few times, but I ignored her. I didn't need to hear more lies or justifications. I'd left her the ring, the phone, and her freedom. That was all I had left to give. In those first days of silence, I learned something about myself. I learned that I could survive without her, that I didn't need her validation or approval to be whole. The marriage had ended long before I'd walked out. I'd just been the last to realize it. The divorce was swift, almost clinical. Sarah didn't contest anything. I think part of her was relieved. It allowed her to move on without any lingering guilt. As for me, I let go of the anger and resentment, realizing that holding on to it would only keep me tied to her. Over time, I found myself again. I reconnected with friends, pursued hobbies I'd forgotten about, started focusing on building a life that was truly mine. The scars were there, sure, but they were healing. So, here I am, months later, writing this for anyone who's going through something similar. If I've learned anything, it's this. Don't ignore your instincts. Don't let someone make you feel small or not enough. Trust yourself and trust that you deserve honesty, loyalty, and love that doesn't come with conditions. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't letting go of the person you loved. It's letting go of the person you thought they were. But once you do, once you break free, you'll realize you're stronger than you ever thought possible. Thanks for listening. Reddit,